Hello everybody and welcome to Chapter 6 of the Python 3.4 tutorial series. In this video we're going to be talking about the for loop. Now the for loop is used for many of the same exact tasks as the while loop. Generally you might see the while loop being used more for what I would call finite tasks, although we saw that the while loop is very popular for the infinite loop task. But generally you have a very structured amount in mind when you use the while loop. And the for loop is used for tasks that might have variable time frames or uncertain time frames that you don't know at the time of your program. Now that said, the for loop and the while loop can almost always be interchanged as far as the actual task that they complete. Now personally, I prefer the for loop in most situations, but a lot of times it's going to come down to personal preference, so it's important to know both, and I do use both. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So let's say for a for loop, for example, generally a for loop is often used with a list. So we're going to make an example list, and we're going to call it example list. And even though we haven't covered lists, a Python list is just encased in square brackets, and then you make a list. You do not have to copy my exact list, but let's just say the list is 1, 6, 7, 3, 6, 9, and 0. Now, what we use for loops for, again, most often is to iterate through a list, or at least what I tend to use them for most, but maybe other people use them differently. Now we can say for x in example list, colon, enter, and here we have the block of code that will go underneath our for loop and the automatic standards that come with Python. So for x in example list, and for now, let's just print x. And what this does is it basically says for x in example list. So we could actually say for, maybe an easier way to think about this would be for thing in example list, print thing. Okay, so it's going to print 1673690. Okay, so let's save and run that. And sure enough, it prints out 1673690, just as we expected. Now, even though people tend to use for loops mostly to iterate through lists like this, you can also use a for loop as a very quick way to make a counter. So if you recall, our while loop required us to say x equals 1, then while x is less than 100 or whatever, do blah, 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 blah. That actually kind of was a lot of lines to add, and maybe you didn't want to do that much. So another thing that you can do with Python 3, and really any version of Python with the for loop, is for x in range, and then we can say 1 to 11 print x. So we're still going to do this first for loop, but just forget about that and look at the second loop's printout. So that would be here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So basically 1 to 10. And what range is doing is range generates a list, numbers 1 through the end of the list. And what it's going to do is it's going to start at this number and go up to this number, but not actually hit this number. Hence why we only got to 10, not 11. Range in Python 3, if you are familiar with Python 2.7, range does what Python 2.7's xrange did. And actually Python 2.7's xrange was based on Python 3's range, because range is a much better function. And what we've actually created here is a generator, and if we wanted to, we could generate this list and do this, and we're not actually going to let it finish this entire iteration, but I'm just going to show it as an example how quickly it begins to print those numbers. You saw how fast these numbers got generated. Now in the old days, and without range being a generator, this generation of 1 to, I don't even know what number this is, would normally have created a gigantic list that was stored in your memory, and it would have literally, even if you had 64-bit Python, I've got 32 gigs of RAM, would estimate that this probably would have blown out even my RAM. So anyway, that's the idea of a generator function as well, but maybe more on those later. So let's return back to the range being more like 11, and that's it. So that's going to conclude the for loop with Python 3. The next chapter is going to be concerning the if statement. So stay tuned for that.